and businessman living in Arizona. We cannot hear you, unfortunately, but we can see you're talking to us. Now we can hear you. Great. Welcome. Good afternoon. Agriculture fight. As a part of that, somebody cut out.
A skoro czwartek, komik przedsiębiorca.
Somebody cut out God bless you. So once again, God bless you. I'm happy to be with you, and I'm sorry I can't be there in person. This is the result of COVID and a president that we've been calling Brandon for a few days. Brandon has introduced new regulations that come into force on the 8th of November, and I'm not sure if I could come back to Arizona if I visited you in Poland. Fortunately, technical opportunities to use. Everybody is now using Skype teleconferences, and it seems to me that we did do this before. It was fashionable. So let's move to the content, the given topic, and a foundational one: freedom in the US and freedom in Poland. Preparing for this interview, I tried and check where freedom was in the American Constitution, and it's in the First Amendment, in the first article. The Congress will not introduce acts of law limiting religious freedom, freedom of speech, of labor, of peaceful gatherings, as well as in terms of petitioning to the government to rectify faults. US 2021 Anno Domini, is it a time when the content of the First Amendment is being followed or not? Is there a conflict about that? And what is the state of affairs in terms of freedom and the motherland of freedom? Well, that's very nicely formulated. A request to the technician, please. I would like to only hear the mic of Rachon, because I'm hearing two Cejrowskis what I'm saying, and I'm getting a loop reversed to me. So I'd like that to stop if possible. So it's all very nicely put in the Constitution, and people have learned to apply it in practice along 250 years. While now America is being transformed into the direction that Poland has been following. That is, nobody knows the Constitution in Poland. Nobody needs to know it by heart, because we know that what's written in the Polish Constitution, it's too much and nobody can learn it by heart. That's number one. And secondly, in practice, it doesn't mean so much, because Constitution is one thing, it's in the National Library, but the decisions are made by officials, public servants of the third and fourth degree, who apply executive provisions, and that's where the United States is headed. And COVID, the great absent of this conference, has brought about all the issues that are going to be raised during this conference. COVID is the great father of this conference. We're talking about the child instead of talking about the father. COVID made the Constitution to be of no relevance, and the First Amendment stopped being applied when churches were closed, both in Poland and in America. In Poland, we are used to that, and we are used to going in the back door, while Americans, when the front door is closed, then they don't know what to do, because they have had no communism, and they don't know you have to use the back door. Back to you, Rachon. If it's back to me, then let me take our perspective, because, of course, preparing for our meeting, I also chose a fragment, a passage from the Polish Constitution of the Republic of Poland, of course, where freedoms, duties of man and citizen are source of the The human dignity is source of these, and it has to be protected by law, and everybody is obliged to defend and respect freedoms of others and cannot be forced to do what the law does not impose. And freedoms can only be limited by way of an act of law when necessary only in exceptional circumstances. So freedom in what we're seeing in the relationship between Poland and the EU it boils down to bringing into question basic freedoms, basic liberties. They are not in the Constitution, but they are even more fundamental, like the right to self-constitution of nations in Europe. And we have a conflict with the EU which boils down to this issue. I don't know if you know this, but I don't think this is going to be a surprise for you. This is what the chair of the Court of Justice of the EU said. He said that he cannot talk about Poland, but he can comment on the conflict about the Polish constitution, and said, for example, that the member states of the EU should not abuse their constitutions, meaning that there are more important legal regulations like those on the Court of Justice. Looking at this from a distance, from where you sit, when what's going on between Poland and the EU and the creation of the United States of Europe, like Guy Verhofstadt said, what do you think about this right to self-constitution and being organized in our country, like decided upon by Poles, by citizens of Poland? I'm a bit disappointed by why do you quote an idiot? It's something like Leszek Miller liked to do. No, he's not an idiot. He graduated from very good schools, I think, the Harvard School of Law, a number of other international universities. He's the chair of the Court of Justice of the European Union. He is not an idiot. But that does not stand in the way of being an idiot. Caligula was an idiot. Neron was an idiot while he stood at the helm of a huge country or organization. So I don't know about Harvard. It used to be a good school 200 years ago, but in the 60s it definitely was not, and right after the Second World War it wasn't either. Now, going back to the issue brought up by Patryk Jaki, the freedom in Poland and the US. The Polish freedom is eaten into by the EU. You quoted Guy Verhofstadt, and we are used to hearing about the United States of America and the United States of Europe as a completely different idea, because that's about taking away the freedoms of the states, while the United States of America was built as a composition of sovereign states that gave a certain remit to the central government in Washington, D.C. The Polish constitution talks about what your rights are and mine as Poles. The Polish constitution grants us certain freedoms, while the American constitution limits the rights of the central authority, allowing for certain issues only. So these are completely two different vantage points. The Polish document says you have right to this and that, while the American says their authority has no right to take away this and that from you. Completely different points of view. And there's the First Amendment, which talks about what the Congress will not do, which is the basis for freedom inscribed into the American Constitution. The concept of United States of Europe, as mentioned by Guy Verhofstadt, is about key issue in the conflict between Poland and the EU, which is one of key issues in our understanding of freedom in Poland, because it boils down to the category of the citizen. Citizen who in the US is the basis, the donor of all the rights, we the people. While in the EU there is no citizenship. You cannot be a citizen of the EU without being a citizen of Poland or France or Germany. The EU has no such category, while we keep hearing in the discussion between Poland and EU that the alleged lack of democracy is an issue in Poland, allegedly because citizens don't vote as those working in the EU institutions would like them to. Is this a fundamental difference between the US and EU, which does not allow for talking about the United States of Europe? Well, indeed, there is room to talk about such a construction, while it's different than in the case of America, because in America it was about being free from the English king. They said we don't want to be a colony of the United Kingdom of England anymore, while it's the other way around in the EU. Guy Verhofstadt says you have to do what we tell you to. So building America was towards freedom and leaving behind what we brought from Europe, while in the EU is the other way around. They're saying you have to limit your rights for the benefit of a bigger body. Like in the case of China, it's very similar. There is no individualism, no Christianity, there is no individual soul where you fight individually for its salvation. It's collectivist, and the EU is executing this collectivist Marxist concept where individuals are of no importance because Che Guevara can cut your head, because what's important is the good of the group, of the collectivity, while in the US the good of the individual is the highest value. You have right to freedom and to build your personal freedom. These are the basics of the Charter of Rights and the American Constitution. So when you build your personal happiness, then the balloon of happiness builds around you. You build a company, you start a family, while in the EU is the other way around. Forget about yourself because we're building something here. So what collectivity are you talking about? The problem, in my opinion, is that we cannot define a group that would be homogeneous in Europe, that could be seen as a group of Europeans, because there are opposing interests among European states. So what would be that group, this value for this collectivity? The group, that is the party, is created at a at a gathering where the king was chosen in Poland in the past. So they looked around, they drank together, they ate together, and they formed groups of common interest, of joint interest. These were parties. That is a group of people. They were concentrated in these parties for a specific purpose and on a one-off basis. And this is the natural formation of groups that you mean, while dividing the society into groups that are predefined. You are black, you are white, you are a entrepreneur, this is a group of workers, this is Marxist, bourgeois workers, etc. This is Marxist approach, and this is top-down. American Marxism is a bestseller by Mark Levin, which presents this thesis, namely Marxism and its political issue of the Soviet Union today is taking over the United States, threatening this basic freedom is as inscribed in the Constitution. But what is the problem? Like, as we see the first executive order of the president along the lines that girls have to compete against boys in school sports with boys who claim to be girls. Looking at this, I wonder what's happening in America. Well, for starters, this is an elderly gentleman who has a very severe dementia. So he's comparable to Nero in such basic issues. He sees as the most important issue girls competing against boys claiming to be girls in 100-meter running. Well, he does not know what happens, He receives a heap of papers to be signed by his deep state, by a group of secretaries that have seen so many presidents that they know better than the president. And, these secretaries know better because I, as secretary, know the other one. We already worked here during the communist times, so we know better, so we decide which paper to give him first to be signed. That's how it works. Right, but this changes nothing. The question is still there. Why this deep state, these secretaries, have decided that the top of this heap of documents to be given to this new president of the United States is precisely the one about girls competing against muscular boys because they said they are girls. What caused these situations? What made those holding real power, not the president, to decide to have this on the top of the heap? I think this was just by accident or a pedophile of the Clinton group, which controls 1/3 of Biden's activities, decided about this. This is a kind of sect, and those who are green and who are followers of the green sect, the climate change sect. I'm sorry I'm not there today physically because I would like to follow the panel of green sect. A windmill will never generate enough energy to provide for the production of such a windmill, which does not make economic sense. Depending on what makes economic sense means, if the goal is creating a huge debt, it does make sense. I wonder who decided that this would be the key issue raised by leftist intellectuals, by leftist media, by social movements. I was in the U.S. In Washington before the election, where during the attempts at bringing down the monument of the president, there were Trans Lives Matters banners spread. So this is a huge political movement, and that's not come from nowhere. It's not by no accident.
It was not an accident. It was not a random decision. There was Donald Trump behind that, and when they took over the reins and during the electoral campaign, what happened? Everything that Trump created should be negated. That was the way of thinking. It's like with Tusk recently. He said that I do not need any political program. Now we just have to oppose to the Law and Justice Party, and that was the concept of Biden. I was hidden in the cellar, and when Trump said yes, he just said no, and if Trump said no, he said yes. So they took these blank pages and they took 19 topics to reverse the decisions taken by Donald Trump. So Trump defended, and he said that young girls cannot compete in sports with guys because it's against equality, because a guy in a skirt will start to win with these girls because that's a boy just wearing a skirt and pretending in order to win competition. So Trump opposed to this vision, and that's why it ended like this. So no matter how shocking it sounds, and it's not only about 100 meters race, there was Fallon Fox, MMA fighters, apart from being a women MMA fighter before she was in Navy SEALs and in the Marines, and she used to be a father of a child. So and now she's the MMA female fighter. But let's leave these girls competing with boys aside. I will add something not to forget. Can you remember this image when Biden slept over on the stairs to Air Force One? So he has dementia. It's a sign. This is the first American president who fell when climbing the stairs, because people normally do it the other way around when stepping down, but in the upward movement 3 times. So that was a challenge, and that was something. So we cannot think about freedom in the United States without asking questions. We didn't have a time for this debate from the elections itself. The majority of the American right says that the elections, presidential elections, were falsified, were forged, and so cancel culture also should be cancelled from social media, from academia, and from the public debate. So what with the foundation of freedom in the US, namely presidential elections? The most important pillars of the freedom are the First and the Second Amendment. The founding fathers who conceived the state of the United States of America, they took an engineering approach to the construction of the state. So what should be the pillars? The triangle of power, to have everything balanced, to acquire the appropriate balance among the powers. And they made some sensible decision. The first one was about the freedom of speech conviction, that nobody can govern this sphere. They cannot tell you what you should believe in or not to believe. They cannot prevent you from your confession. So something what Donald Tusk suggested in Poland. He suggested to get rid of religious symbols in Polish institutions. And all that leads to the freedom of speech, that you can burn the American flag. If you bought it, it's yours, it's your piece of material. And in Poland, it's nothing like that. The Second Amendment, the key one, that is the foundation for American freedom to carry and use and possess gun. That means that you can bear a gun. That means that you can carry it with you and use it. So what is the purpose of the Second Amendment that we do not have? To get rid of corrupted power, authority, because they have police, they have the military, and they can destroy you. So who should defend the citizens against the governors? That's why they have the Second Amendment. They can bear, carry, and use arms. And it was also inscribed in the initial version of the Constitution. So there was a book, Federalist. I highly recommend it to you. So they explained that it's all about giving the nation possibility to stand up against the authority. In Poland, we do not have such tool. And the third pillar, it's election. Yeah, because I got lost. Why are you talking about the right to bear arms in response to a question about election fraud? These elections were approved by globally, but we have many questions with regard not only without some about the mail ballot, the correspondence ballot, and we are asking about it in the context of this third pillar, this fundamental right. Great actor here. COVID-19, everything is related to COVID-19. That caused the mail ballot. Before, it was available for some exceptional situations for people, for example, staying in hospital. So in Poland, you have a team of people having handling you to go to to cast a vote. But if you're on a drip, for example, you are eliminated from the ballot in Poland, for example. So it was always like that sometimes it was very difficult to reach the right place on the election place. So there are different tricks. So that's why the mail ballot emerged, because it was the possibility the citizen has to ask for for the voting papers. And when COVID appeared, they said, so let's distribute it to everyone, and they distributed more cards than citizens, because some of them had 3 addresses, for example, and so somebody could find 4 voting cards in their mailbox, and they could take 4 of them, and they said they will not know who voted, so they could fill in 4 cards. So in some places it happened that there were more votes than people who are authorized to vote. So that caused a wave of election frauds due to this over-distribution. Okay, but what's next? There is a question with regard to for example, from the yesterday elections in Virginia. 10 percentage points more for Joe Biden, and now before Joe Biden, and now the candidates supported by Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris. He lost to the Republican, and the whole world said that it was the referendum for or against Joe Biden. So the America still lives in the context of these presidential elections. But Democrats in Virginia, they related to Trump all the time. They were repeating Trump, and the guy that won, the Republican, he didn't ask Trump for support. He didn't invite any officials to Virginia. The Democrat asked Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Barack Obama to build the facade that because he wanted to communicate that I don't have any program, but I have my colleagues, and they thought that it was going to be an easy win. Nobody knew that person. It was 2% of public awareness, so only people from the same street. And now the guy won these elections in the state. In Poland, citizens are not able to win elections. In Poland, a citizen, if they choose a candidate, they're not able with this election list to win. People are not able because we have no.
Muszę zbierać podpisy, różne inne rzeczy. Zanim skończę o Virginii, to panu pokażę drugą karteczkę. Otóż
We do not have the same political system. In New Jersey, the new head of parliament is the truck driver who stood against the establishment, against Democrat. He offered 150 and he invested $153 in his campaign. I've checked it. It was 154, but I got it wrong. It is 153, and he said, "I won. I'm the trucker. I'm a blue-collar worker. I will be." I will be the winner. So in Poland this is impossible because we don't have single-member districts, because we have the whole apparatus preventing such situation. But going back to Virginia, the guy financed his campaign from his own pocket. And going back to our topic, freedom in the US and freedom in Poland, it was not only about Trump program. It was one thing that was hard to understand for the Poles, that Democrats think that in the US it should be like in Europe or like in Poland, and you take it for granted. And me, as a Polish person, I also took it for granted that the school curricula should be offered by the guys from the ministry, and parents had nothing to do with that. And in the United States, the school curricula are defined by parents, so parents are suggested some curriculum, but they can vote for or they can vote against. We do not want to hear about tits. In the third grade of the primary school, they reject some topics and they approve some other topics. Something when in Europe it would be fully acceptable. But why parents should meddle with school curricula? But the other guy said, but why? Parents? Parents without any influence on what their kids are learning, on what they are taught? And the elections in Virginia were about that, and the Americans still have a tool to see that such guys win, because they want to decide. They want to say yes or no. Okay, so school curricula being defined by parents, and Americans can win elections based on that. But another thing which is very important, and it's also an element of cultural war, we had to deal with some spectacular case when father in the United States, who was aware that his daughter was raped by a transgender guy. He was treated. He was a teen. The parent was treated as a criminal because he wanted this case to be resolved at the school level. And he was treated as a lunatic, and only when he made it public and it became public that it was truth, that caused that the whole America started to discuss it. The Democrats from the top layer of the cake, they are pedophile. They are perverts. We have Bill Clinton, a pervert, and other people supporting them, the whole organization. Some of them got to jail. One of them committed suicide because he knew too much about Clinton's brothers who worked with Bill Clinton and talking about pizza because they wanted to order little girls in a clandestine way. So they promote proliferation of pedophiles. They come up with an idea that boy wears a skirt and he becomes a girl, and that allows him to go to the ladies' room. So this was the case when, in this way, one guy raped one little girl, and then he repeated the same in another school. So when pedophile govern, such phenomena like guys in skirts become more and more popular. Pizzagate was not as investigated as the issue of the island of pedophiles, which was described in a Netflix series. So the main perpetrator didn't survive that in one of the jails. I wanted to ask about something which is inexistent in Europe, not on the same scale at least. We got accustomed to this concept that gender is a cultural construct, so we can decide whether we are a woman or a man. We as citizens of the Republic of Poland, when dealing with politicians, repeating that something like that exists. So that became something really familiar with us because we can hear about it from now and then, but we didn't hear from the Polish politicians that a race can be a cultural construct. And in the United States, there is the whole stream telling and promoting that you can choose your race, that you can, there's the so-called critical race theory. Something like that is under discussion in the United States now. So is it an element of freedom or is it distortion of the freedom because it is linked to something that was tackled by our four panelists, so cancel culture. So is it the American mainstream? Will it happen that people who believe in that who don't believe in this theory will be cancelled from the public discussion? Sometimes it happens, like Cardinal Wyszyński said, that we have non-possumus. We need to apply some research methods, not to enter the lunatic room. So it happened before the war that you could go to the work camp if you thought differently than the head of states. So you couldn't object to the government, and that comes from Harvard. Please do not send your kids there because they will get something implanted in their brains. Race is not a question, it's not a matter of choice. A 20-year-old who didn't have his biology classes, who doesn't know that there are some biological races that, for example, animals have their breeds. If you have 2 or 3 races and they start to mix, it's very difficult to name. So if you have a white mom and a black father, So it's quite still quite clear. But if you get mixed with Indians, with and with other races in further fourth generations, it's very difficult to state what is the race, and people like this can opt for one race, not because not in this biological part that somebody feels Apache because was brought by an Apache grandfather. Somebody like that can decide because the situation is complex. However, it doesn't change the fact that there are three biological races, and this is a matter of biology. But this choice that, for example, somebody wants to opt for being an Apache, that results from the mess in a person's life. But if you build the whole concept of functioning for society, if you define what's allowed and what's not allowed based on that, we also build some kind of oppression, because apart from existing racial problems in the United States, which are described in details quite recently, since quite recently we can observe some discrimination of white people because they are not representatives of other races or other cultures, and this is something which is declared by Black Lives Matters ideologists. So how does this issue look like in the United States? So it's really awful. Black Lives Matters is a Marxist institution. They said that we are a Marxist organization. So Trump described them like a terrorist group. What they do, this is the aggression that was performed by Ku Klux Klan. Republicans had nothing to do with Ku Klux Klan. So if somebody says that I'm worse according to racial theory, that you quoted the critical race theory, that I'm worse because I'm white, if I'm worse, I deserve some support. And please say how many whites do you have globally? So I'm minority, I'm blonde, it's less than 1%. And as minority, I should be defended by your black crowd, because there is more black people all around. So if they call it, we should object, and you should present your gun. You would be called a white supremacist after saying that. Of course, a black guy should the white guy should point out what we do good. So we spread Christianity, we offered rights that were not offered by any other Chinese or any other Arab governor or king. People got access to trains, to different inventions. Yes, but people objecting to this theory, they would say that the white guy brought slavery to the United States, that they traded in human beings, that they captured people in the Black Africa. So that is the foundation of many disputes about the fundamental rights in the United States. Yes, and I said, learn some history, because the slavery was brought to the United States by the English king, and the United States was a country that got rid of slavery soon, and they got rid of many bad things brought from Europe. and the British king brought the slavery because he got inspired by some other governors. So trading in slaves, it was started by Muslims. So Muslims should say sorry, and the English king. But we in the United States, we got rid of this phenomenon soon. I think that there was the whole movement created in the 60s, and they think differently in their opinion. It was not, we do not owe it to the English king, the British king, or the Muslims, but the United States. And that is the basis for what happened later with Black Lives Matter and their impact on last elections.
But it's the only country that, in defense of the enslaved blacks, had a civil war to free the slaves in the South, went so far as to have a civil war. It's not about reaching to other countries to support them in this and that. No, they came to the conclusion that that was unacceptable, and that brought about a civil war. The North defeated the proponents of slavery, risking losing their country, their state. And these freed slaves kissed Lincoln on Lincoln's feet and hands to thank him for freeing them, for risking his peaceful life in the North to free them in the South. And now BLM finds these stories where where this old lady comes to Lincoln to thank him, and they say he disgraced that person. While many of these movements are about felling monuments as symbols of, for example, slavery in the United States, while at the same time it's the society that brought about the end of slavery. And Kościuszko is an example of the case, because Kościuszko's monument was felled in front of the White House. Right, there's quite a number of such stories. That's why we're talking about this during the conference, because if you don't know the history of Poland or the United States of America, then you start felling monuments, which makes no sense. So they felled Lincoln's monument, Kościuszko's monument, for coming to the U.S. in a situation where the U.S. is a free made it possible for the U.S. to be a free country, which made it possible for blacks to live wherever they want, work wherever they want, enter any restaurant, and even be owners of such restaurants. So there is no difference between them and white men in terms of their opportunities. This is the result of a whole series of developments. Of course, you can stick to slavery that was there at some point, but you could drag on about that in any country that had slavery in the past. You could talk about Venezuela, Ecuador, Mexico, countries that are dwelled and managed by colored peoples. Why don't we bring them down for having slavery at one point in the past? Right, another novelty in the US, that would be one last question I'd like to ask you about money and the Great Green Deal. You say it makes no economic sense, but according to the Bank of America, the investment necessary to be made in Green Deal are supposed to stand at around $300 trillion until 2050, while in comparison by Tomasz Wróblewski to annual investment worldwide is between 20 altogether worldwide in all kinds of investments is between 20 and 50 trillion of dollars, sorry. This means huge money that has to be lent, borrowed, and paid back, so somebody will earn. a part of that money. You say it's a sector, but it's also huge business, and part of that huge business is democratic representatives and democratic politicians in the US. How does that translate into what created the huge capital in the US, and among others, the oil industry and energy sources? Well, the sect that I talked about is the facade built by politicians, by youth, that Flundberg, that little girl that was brainwashed. I mean, Greta, oh, that's her name. That's a facade of these fools, idiots, that are being used as tools, while the big corporations are in the back seat that will earn trillions of dollars. We can look at this at the American or Polish market. The subsidies for agricultural production, who is that good for? Well, if the government says we pay subsidies to produce corn or soy, then the farmer is happy because they will get money. But who has been financed? In fact, well, the corporation that buys that corn. They buy the corn cheaper because the farmer got a subsidy. But the farmer got nothing at the end of the day. The farmer only got the subsidy for the money to be transferred to the corporation. The corporation is, they have their hands clean because they just took the money that was subsidized to the farmer in the form of money paid into the treasury by us, simple citizens. So in our taxes, we pay to corporations, and which they get by buying that corn from the producer, from the farmer. The same goes for the subsidies to windmills that we have to subsidize because they make no economic sense. We have to help their producers, their users, because we care about the climate, we want energy to be green. That money at the end of the day goes to some kind of corporation that can, thanks to that and only thanks to that, sell this non-economic investment of a windmill. It will never make the energy necessary for its production, but thanks to the subsidies, here you go, and we buy that from China, so we are, cutting our own throats. If the climate change was a real threat to our survival, then Biden would have adrenaline even at his stage of life and would never fall asleep. If we are talking about a meteorite hitting the Earth in 4 years, then we would be focused on that, and he couldn't sleep because Biden couldn't sleep because he would be afraid. If he was afraid about the level of oceans going up, then we would have no house on the ocean. But he fell asleep at one conference because that was not an important conference. India, China, they're good. They made good decisions by not going to the conference, talking to idiots. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Wojciech Cejrowski, comedian and business owner living in Arizona. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. See you back in a minute.